Clarity is no longer found by adding more ambition, more possessions, or more noise. Instead, it comes from subtraction. You see through what no longer matters, the illusions that once governed decisions, status, urgency, approval begin to loosen their hold. You've lived long enough to recognize the difference between motion and progress, between activity and meaning. The years have stripped away what was unnecessary, not as a punishment, but as refinement. Like a master craftsman who no longer hacks at stone, but carves with precision, you now see life with fewer distractions and deeper understanding. What once felt essential now feels optional. What once felt urgent now feels small. And what once felt confusing now appears, at last, in proper proportion. Marcus Aurelius said that you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This was not a call to fear death, but to respect time. Marcus understood that awareness of mortality sharpens judgment. You now understand this truth not as philosophy, but as lived reality. This revelation is not regret speaking. It is wisdom finally finding its voice. You understand that many of life's greatest lessons arrive disguised as delay, disappointment, or detour. You see now that the years you once questioned were not mistakes, they were training. The decades behind you have taught lessons no book could ever deliver. You have learned how strength is built quietly in ordinary mornings and long responsibilities. You know that patience outlasts force, that endurance often matters more than brilliance, and that character is revealed not in moments of recognition, but in seasons of persistence. You understand what the young cannot yet grasp, that life does not reward speed nearly as much as it rewards consistency. You have watched confidence rise and fall, fortunes come and go, and identities shift. Through it all, something within you endured, and that endurance is now one of your greatest assets. Even the seasons you once judged as wasted now reveal themselves as essential preparation. The job that drained you taught discipline. The relationship that failed taught discernment. The years that felt invisible taught humility. Nothing was wasted. Everything contributed. Seneca once observed that difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Seneca's wisdom becomes unmistakably true with age. What once felt like punishment now stands revealed as conditioning, quietly building resilience you now depend upon. You have learned that wisdom does not arrive in dramatic moments. It accumulates slowly, like interest on a long-term investment. And now, with decades behind you, that investment is yielding returns in perspective, restraint, and insight. With the wisdom of experience comes a rare and powerful opportunity, one that does not require proving, rushing, or starting from zero. You are no longer driven by the need to impress others or justify yourself. Instead, you are guided by the desire to be true. This freedom is one of life's most underappreciated gifts. You've earned the right to choose carefully, to say no without guilt, to act without explanation. Decisions now carry weight because they are made consciously, not compulsively. You understand that fewer commitments, chosen well, create greater impact than countless obligations accepted. Then Aristotle told us that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Self-knowledge does not come early. It arrives after years of testing assumptions, correcting errors, and watching patterns repeat. You now possess this knowledge, and with it, authority over your own direction. This is the season where meaning replaces momentum, where direction matters more than speed, where intention finally governs action. You are not late. You are precisely on time for this chapter. The legacy you've been building, knowingly or not, can now be shaped with intention. Not through grand gestures or public recognition, but through steady contribution, through mentorship, example, and completion. This is harvest time, the season when insight ripens into service and experience becomes nourishment for others. Legacy is not what you leave behind, it is what you leave within people, a way of thinking, a standard of conduct, a sense of proportion in a world addicted to excess. By Confucius, wisdom, compassion, and courage are the three universally recognized moral qualities. In later life, these qualities no longer need cultivation, they need expression. You have lived them. Now you are called to pass them on. The world does not need more noise. It needs seasoned voices willing to speak calmly, act deliberately, and guide quietly. This is not about authority. It is about stewardship. To see clearly is not the end of the journey. It is the opening of wisdom's window, where understanding invites responsibility. You now stand at a vantage point earned through years of effort, endurance, and reflection. Albert Einstein once said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." True wisdom brings humility, not certainty. You no longer pretend to have all the answers, but you know which questions matter. This chapter asks something simple, yet profound. What will you do with what you now see? The view is clearer. The noise has faded. The essentials remain. This is not an ending. It is alignment, a coming into focus, a moment when the years behind you and the purpose ahead finally meet, full circle. Perspective changes everything. From this vantage point in life, you no longer see existence as a scoreboard of wins and losses, but as a coherent story unfolding across decades. The struggles that once felt personal now appear purposeful. The disappointments that once felt unfair reveal their shaping power. You recognize patterns, how events once resisted eventually redirected you toward something sturdier and more enduring. Mortality, once avoided, now sharpens life rather than diminishing it. You understand, as only experience can teach, that time's finiteness gives weight to each choice. Knowing that the clock is not endless brings urgency without panic, purpose without desperation. You are no longer rushed by the world's demands. Instead, you move deliberately, guided by what truly matters. Michel de Montaigne, "He who fears he shall suffer already suffers what he fears." With years comes the realization that much suffering was imagined, not inevitable. Perspective dissolves needless fear and replaces it with calm authority. You've earned the right to act deliberately. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer chase, you choose. This is not the arrogance of certainty, but the confidence of understanding. The harvest of your years is not measured only in titles held, wealth accumulated, or goals achieved. It is measured in discernment, in the ability to tell what deserves attention and what does not. You've gathered emotional intelligence, restraint, empathy, and resilience, qualities that cannot be rushed or taught quickly. You know when to speak and when silence carries more wisdom. You've learned that restraint often speaks louder than opinion. Like a tree with deep roots, you are less shaken by storms because you understand their passing nature. You've seen cycles repeat, booms and busts, praise and criticism, and you no longer confuse them with permanence. By Epictetus' view, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This truth becomes undeniable after decades of living. You've seen that reaction, not circumstance, shapes destiny. Your harvest includes mastery over response. This harvest is quiet, substantial, and enduring. It does not clamor for recognition. It simply stands solid, dependable, and ready to nourish others. Your experience now serves a greater purpose. The world is crowded with opinions, but starving for wisdom. Speed dominates conversation, yet depth quietly disappears. What you carry cannot be replaced by novelty or automation. It was earned through years of responsibility, failure survived, lessons integrated, and values refined. Your specific combination of lived experience gives you unique authority. You understand consequences because you've lived with them. You recognize character because you've tested your own. Teaching, guiding, and modeling integrity, these are acts of contribution that only seasoned hands can offer. Socrates gives us idea that education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel. At this stage, contribution is not about instruction, but ignition. You don't impose wisdom, you awaken it in others through example. Whether through mentorship, counsel, or quiet presence, your influence now travels deeper than it ever did in your striving years. This is leadership without force, authority without noise. You are not being asked to discard your life and begin again. You are being invited to bring everything full circle. Unfinished dreams are not dismissed, they are refined. They shed ego and retain essence. There is wholeness in resolving what was left open, peace in saying what was never said, meaning in finishing what still matters. Completion does not require grand achievements. It often appears in conversations, reconciliations, forgiveness, or the quiet courage to let something finally rest. Carl Jung said that what we do not make conscious will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. Completion is consciousness. It is choosing to resolve rather than repeat, to integrate rather than avoid. You now possess the awareness required for wholeness. This is the craftsman's phase of life, where rough edges are smoothed, details attended to, and the work is finally signed with care. You've lived long enough to know that legacy is not what is remembered, it is what is passed on. Stories fade, buildings erode, but values transmitted endure. Wisdom unshared is unfinished work. This chapter calls you to step fully into the role you've been preparing for all along. Steward of insight, keeper of perspective, and contributor to something larger than yourself. Not by force, but by presence. Not by volume, but by clarity. Through Leo Tolstoy, point of view. The sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. Service, in later life, is not sacrifice. It is fulfillment. It is the natural expression of accumulated wisdom seeking purpose. The window is open. The view is clear. You see the road behind you and the path ahead with equal understanding. What you do now, how you speak, what you pass on, what you complete will echo far beyond your own years. This is not the closing chapter. It is the chapter where meaning consolidates, wisdom is transferred, and life at last makes complete sense.